I landed in Sarajevo just before midnight. The airport was almost empty, one cafe closing, one cleaner sweeping the floor, and a single taxi waiting outside like it already knew who it was supposed to pick up. My hostel was about 40 minutes away, and there were no buses at that hour. I approached the taxi slowly, already preparing the sentence I always use when traveling on a tight budget. How much to the old town? The driver didn't answer right away. He looked at me through the side mirror first, tired eyes but calm. Then he simply said, "Get in. We talk later." His English was broken, but clear enough to understand. I hesitated for a second. Then I opened the door. It was the quietest taxi ride I've ever taken. As we drove through the dark streets, I noticed something strange. The city looked peaceful, but in a way that felt earned, like it had seen its worst days already. Graffiti on the walls, old bullet marks still visible on certain buildings, streetlights flickering on narrow roads. Sarajevo wasn't hiding anything, but it wasn't explaining anything either. The driver didn't speak. He didn't play music. He just drove with steady hands, like he knew every turn in the dark by memory alone. After about 10 minutes, I felt the need to say something, so I asked him the first question that came out. "Have you been driving taxis long?" He nodded once. "Since after the war," he said. Then he went quiet again. I didn't want to push, but I couldn't help asking, "Do you like it?" He paused and then said something I didn't expect. "It keeps me moving. That's enough." We entered the old town, cobblestone streets, closed shops, tiny alleyways too narrow for cars. "This is it," he said, pointing to the building that matched the address I'd written down. I reached for my wallet. Before I could even ask how much, he shook his head. "No charge." I thought I misheard, so I asked again, slowly this time. "Sorry, I don't understand. How much?" He looked at me, not annoyed, not smiling, just steady. "Nothing. You pay nothing tonight." My first instinct was to insist. I explained that I had money, that I didn't want charity, that I was just traveling, not stranded, not broke. He listened patiently. Then he said something that silenced me completely. "When I was younger, someone drove me across a border. I had nothing, not even shoes. He did not take my money. He said, 'Maybe one day you will do the same.'" I must have gone quiet because he turned the engine off and said, "It took me 27 years, but tonight is the night, so you don't pay." I didn't know what to say. That's the thing about real kindness. It removes words from your mouth. I reached out my hand. He shook it, firmly but without pride. As I got out, he rolled the window down and added, "One day you will know how it feels to finish a promise." Then he drove away. No name, no contact, no picture, no proof. Just a moment that felt like it had been waiting a long time to finally happen. The next morning, I woke to the sound of church bells, followed by the distant call to prayer. Sarajevo felt like a city built from different voices that somehow learned how to sing in harmony. I walked narrow streets lined with old cafes, small bakeries, and shops selling handmade copper goods. I looked at people's faces, not searching for the driver, just wondering if one of them knew him. The first person I spoke to was the hostel owner, a woman named Elvira. She served strong Bosnian coffee and asked me where I was from. When I mentioned the taxi ride, she raised her eyebrows. "No charge?" she repeated. "That doesn't happen here often." I asked if she knew someone who drove since the war. An older man, quiet, tired eyes. She didn't know for sure, but she asked something unexpected. Did he tell you why? Yes, I said. I think he was keeping a promise. She nodded slowly. A long silence followed. Then she said, in this city, every kind act has a history. Later that day, I went to see the famous Latin Bridge, the place where history once changed forever. I didn't go for the historical significance. I just wanted to sit by the water. There I met another traveler, a tall German man named Jonas. We talked easily like travelers do. He had been volunteering in Sarajevo for months, helping rebuild schools in small villages nearby. I asked if he had heard stories like mine, taxi drivers refusing payment. He thought for a moment. Then he said something I will never forget. Yes, not many, but sometimes, usually from people who lost someone in the war. Why? I asked. He looked at the water before answering. Because when they were at their worst, someone helped them, and that help never had a price. I must have been staring at him because he added softly, here, we don't pay kindness back. We pay it forward. We pay it for. Over the next 2 days, I walked more than I needed to. Maybe part of me hoped to see that taxi again, not to repay money, but just to say thank you properly. But I never saw him. Instead, I kept hearing similar phrases from different people. Some debts aren't meant to end. A gift is not a bill. You don't need a name to remember someone. And slowly, very slowly, I began to understand. This was never a mystery. This was a culture of remembering what once saved your life and waiting patiently for the moment you can pass it on. On my last day, I walked into a small cafe with no name, just the smell of espresso and old wood. The waiter was older, with careful hands and a quiet posture. I ordered a coffee. When I sat, I pulled out my notebook and started writing down everything I remembered about the taxi driver. His voice, his phrases, the way he said, "Tonight is the night." Then the waiter placed the coffee on my table and asked, "Traveler?" I nodded. Saw the world or the people? I'm starting to see the people, I said. He smiled, not pleasantly, knowingly, as if he had once learned the same lesson. Then he said, when someone helps you move forward, you don't forget, even if you forget who it was. I looked up sharply. Do you know him? I asked. He paused, then answered, I don't need to. I have been him. My last night in Sarajevo came quietly. No big plans, no expectations. I walked through the old town one final time, listening to conversations drift from balconies, the smell of grilled food filling the air. Normal life, honest life, the kind that doesn't try to impress travelers. But when I returned to my hostel room, I felt something new. I wanted to rest, not because I was tired, but because I finally felt allowed to. I turned on the small lamp by my bed and took out my notebook. Just like the night in Croatia, I didn't write about destinations. I didn't list costs or plans. I wrote a sentence. He didn't take my money because the price was already paid, somewhere by someone, years before me. The next morning, I packed my bag and headed to the bus station. The sky was gray, the kind of gray that feels like it could become rain or sun, depending on what you believe. I asked the cashier for a ticket to Belgrade. She stamped it and handed it back without looking up. When I turned to leave, she suddenly said, sometimes strangers change your direction. You don't need to know their name to thank them. I stopped walking. I hadn't mentioned anything about the taxi. I hadn't spoken of it at all. But something about this city made me feel like everyone understood already. I took a window seat. A middle-aged man sat next to me. We didn't speak until the bus began moving. Then he asked, Did you enjoy Sarajevo? Yes, I said. It was different. He nodded. It always is. Then silence. After a few minutes, he looked out the window and said softly, I once crossed a border with nothing but a bag. Someone paid for my bus ticket. He said I would repay it one day, but not to him. My heart stopped. I turned toward him. Before I could speak, or he continued, that's how debt works here. You don't owe people. You owe the road. When the bus reached the border, the officer checked our passports. The man next to me waited patiently. I noticed his hands were calm, like someone who had earned their peace. I wanted to ask him everything. Did he know the driver? Was it him? Was it someone he knew? But something inside me said, don't. So instead, I said something simple. I hope I get to repay it one day. He smiled the most peaceful smile I have seen in years. You will, he said. And when you do, don't ask for a thank you. Just know your turn finally came. When we crossed the border, he closed his eyes and slept. I looked out the window and realized I didn't need to find the driver anymore. I didn't even need to understand him. I just needed to remember him. Weeks passed. Borders changed. Landscapes shifted. Flat fields turned to mountains, then turned to sea. I stopped trying to explain the taxi story to other travelers. Not because I forgot it, but because I finally understood something. Some stories are not meant to convince anyone. They're meant to quietly guide you. My journey continued. I volunteered at a farm in Romania. I washed dishes in a hostel in Bulgaria. I helped build tents for an outdoor festival in Serbia. It wasn't glamorous, but it was honest. And every time I felt exhausted, frustrated, or ready to quit, something always happened. A stranger offered help. Someone shared food without asking. Someone showed me the way when my map died. Someone said, don't worry, you'll get there. Not one of those people asked for money. None of them asked for a favor in return. And one night, I finally understood what was happening. I was not traveling alone. I was living inside other people's kindness. It happened unexpectedly on a bus station bench in Skopje. A young traveler, maybe 19, sat beside me. He looked pale, anxious. He kept checking his money, counting it again and again. Finally, he whispered, I don't have enough for the bus to Thessaloniki. He didn't ask for help. He simply told the truth. I looked at him and saw myself from years ago, tired, unsure, almost ready to turn back. I didn't think. I didn't try to make a speech. I simply walked to the ticket counter and bought 2 tickets. When I handed him one, he looked at me in disbelief. Why would you do that? I opened my mouth, but no words came, because the words weren't mine. They belonged to a man in a taxi years ago. So I repeated them exactly as I had heard them. Maybe one day, you will do the same. He stared at the ticket for a long time. Then he asked softly, how will I find you again? I smiled gently. You won't. That's the point. We took the same bus that night. He sat by the window, fell asleep with the ticket still in his hand. I didn't feel proud. I didn't feel noble. I just felt at peace, like a long-held breath had finally been released. And somewhere between 2 countries, as darkness filled the sky, I realized I had finally finished a promise, one that didn't start with me, one that won't end with me. Traveling used to feel like distance. Now it feels like reflection. There's a moment on the road when you stop asking, why did that happen to me? And start asking, what did that moment turn me into? I didn't meet the taxi driver again. I didn't need to, because eventually I understood. We don't owe anything to the people who help us. We owe it to the next person who might need it. And that is when travel finally changed for me. It no longer mattered how many countries I'd seen or how many borders I'd crossed. What mattered was how many times I had chosen to keep someone else moving, because movement is a human language. It's spoken when someone says, "Take my seat, take this food, I'll show you the way. You won't sleep outside tonight." None of these sentences mention money, but every one of them says, "I've been where you are." That's when I realized the taxi ride I took years ago was never about transportation. It was inheritance. Not the kind you receive from one person, but from everyone who survived something and chose to leave kindness behind instead of bitterness. And when that happens, something rare occurs. Strangers stop being strangers. Roads stop being roads. And the journey becomes a home. I used to think we remember certain people because they were important. Now I believe something different. We remember them because they arrived exactly when we needed someone, and then they let us keep walking. I will never know the driver's name. I will never repay him. I will never prove that moment happened. But here's what I do know. On a quiet night in Sarajevo, a stranger helped me when I didn't ask and didn't let me pay. And years later, on a quiet night at another border, I helped someone else without asking and without letting them pay. Not because I owe anything, but because the road remembers. And sometimes it lets us be part of that memory. The greatest journeys are not measured in miles. They're measured in how many people kept going because you were there at the right moment. So I still travel, not to escape, not to collect places, but to leave a small light behind on the kind of night I once found mine. And that is what really happened when the taxi driver refused to charge me. Real people, real roads, real choices. If this story spoke to you, maybe you're closer to your own journey than you think. Subscribe, because one day the next traveler might need you.